It is a lie." The words were not a shout. They were not a plea. They were a statement of fact, dropped like a stone into the suffocating silence of the Duke of Blackwood's study. The sound was swallowed by the thick Aubusson carpet, by the damask-draped walls, by the sheer weight of accusation that pressed down from the high, coffered ceiling. Alara, Duchess of Blackwood, stood before her husband, her spine a rod of iron inside a gown of midnight silk. The fabric felt like a shroud. Her hands, usually restless, were perfectly still at her sides. She did not look at the crumpled letter in his fist. She did not look at his aunt, Lady Beatrice, who hovered near the fireplace like a carrion bird smelling decay. She looked only at him, at Alistair. His face was a mask of cold fury. The handsome lines she had once traced in secret now hardened into something unrecognizable. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held no warmth, no question, only a verdict already delivered. "A lie?" Alistair's voice was dangerously soft. "I have it here, in his own hand, a poet's florid prose, confessing his ardor. An ardor, he claims, you have returned." "I have returned nothing," Alara said, her own voice a low, steady thing that defied the tremor in her bones. "I was civil to a guest at our table, nothing more." "Civility does not invite this filth," he bit out, shaking the paper as if to rid it of its contamination. "This speaks of clandestine glances, of shared sentiments, of a connection that mocks me in my own house." Lady Beatrice made a small, distressed sound. "Alistair, dear boy, perhaps we should be calm. The Duchess is overwrought. Her delicate nature—" Alara's gaze flickered to the older woman. Delicate. It was the word Beatrice had used to describe her for 3 years. A delicate constitution, a delicate sensibility, a delicate mind, unfit for the rigors of running a great house. It was a slow-moving garrote, that word, tightening with every passing month, isolating her, painting her as a fragile porcelain doll to a husband who prized strength above all else. "My nature is not at issue," Alara stated, her attention snapping back to Alistair. "Your aunt's timely discovery of this letter is, as is your willingness to believe it." A muscle jumped in Alistair's jaw. He was a duke. His word was law, his judgment final. He was not accustomed to being questioned, least of all by his quiet, ornamental wife. The wife he had chosen for her beauty and her breeding, expecting her to be a placid fixture in the grand architecture of his life. "You dare imply my aunt is a party to this?" he demanded. "I imply nothing. I state that the letter is a forgery, or a fantasy. I have given that man no encouragement." "I saw you with him at dinner," Alistair countered, his voice rising now. "Leaning in, smiling. Your eyes, for once, were alive. I merely assumed it was the wine. It seems I was mistaken." The cruelty of it landed like a physical blow. For once, alive. He had noticed. He had noticed her brief spark of animation while listening to a man discuss Italian art, and he had twisted it into a weapon against her. The 1,000 nights she had sat opposite him at dinner, trying to draw him out, trying to find a crack in the granite facade of his duty, had gone unnoticed. But this one moment of simple pleasure, had been catalogued and saved as evidence. She felt a strange, chilling calm settle over her. It was the calm of the abyss, the moment you stop flailing and realize you are already drowning. For months, a secret had been curled inside her, a tiny, precious hope that she had planned to share. A hope that this, a child, their heir, would finally bridge the chasm between them. Now she understood. There was no bridge strong enough to span this void. He would never believe her, and even if he did, the truth of his contempt was now laid bare. "I see," she said. The words were quiet, hollowed out. "You have made your judgment." "I have," he confirmed, his face grim. "You have brought shame upon this house, upon my name. Alistair, please, Beatrice murmured, stepping forward to place a comforting hand on his arm. Think of the scandal. We must manage this quietly. For the family. He looked down at his aunt, his expression softening for a moment. He trusted her. Beatrice had been a constant in his life since his mother's death, a bastion of aristocratic propriety and unwavering support. He saw her concern as genuine, her counsel as wise. He did not see the glint of triumph in her eyes. Alara did. Alistair turned back to his wife. You will retire to your rooms. You will see no one. We will travel to Blackwood Manor at the end of the week. You will remain there, in the country, indefinitely. It was a sentence, a life of gilded imprisonment. She would be the mad Duchess in the country, the embarrassing secret tucked away from society. She would be utterly alone, and the child growing within her would be born into that prison, a captive from its first breath. No. The word was not spoken. It was a silent, violent rebellion that flared deep within her. It was the fierce, primal instinct of a mother protecting her young. They could have her title. They could have her reputation. They would not have her child. She gave a single, formal nod. As you wish, Your Grace. The use of his title was a blade, and she saw it hit its mark. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise or hurt, crossed his face before the mask of ducal outrage slammed back into place. She turned and walked out of the study. Her back was straight. Her head was high. She did not run. She did not weep. She walked with the measured grace of a duchess, every step taking her further away from the life she had known, and closer to an unknown, terrifying freedom. In her dressing room, the air was still thick with the scent of the lavender she favored. It smelled of endings. She moved with a numb, efficient purpose that felt alien to her own body. She did not look at the rows of exquisite gowns in the wardrobe, each one a memory of a ball, a dinner, a public appearance where she had felt more like a prize bull on display than a woman. She ignored the velvet-lined trays of jewels, the diamonds and sapphires that had felt like beautiful, cold stones weighing her down. Instead, she went to a small, unassuming writing desk in the corner. From a locked drawer, she retrieved a simple leather pouch. Inside was a significant sum of cash. It was the last of her dowry, money her father had insisted she keep for her own use, a prescient act of paternal concern. She had never touched it, until now. She changed out of the silk gown and into the plainest traveling dress she owned, a durable dark wool that would attract no attention. She packed a single, small valise, a change of linen, a warm shawl, a book of poetry, not by the man she was accused of favoring, but by a woman whose words spoke of resilience. Her final act was the most deliberate. She walked to her dressing table and looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was pale, her eyes wide and dark in the gaslight, but she was not broken. She was becoming someone else, someone harder. She twisted the wedding ring from her finger. The Blackwood diamond, a formidable stone set in heavy platinum, felt suddenly foreign. A manacle. She placed it squarely in the center of the polished mahogany surface, directly under the light. It was not hidden. It was a statement, a surrender, and a severance. Then, with her small bag in hand, she walked not to the grand staircase, but to the servants' passage at the back of the house. The air here smelled of beeswax and boiled cabbage, the honest smells of labor. She passed a young housemaid who gasped and curtsied low, her eyes wide with shock. Alara simply gave her a small, sad smile and continued on. She slipped out a side door into the mews, where the damp London fog coiled like a living thing. It wrapped around her, hiding her, swallowing the Duchess of Blackwood whole. A carriage for hire was waiting at the corner, summoned by a discreet note and a generous coin passed to a bootboy an hour earlier. As she settled into the worn leather seat and gave the driver instructions for the first of many coaching inns that would obscure her trail, she placed a hand over her still flat stomach. A silent promise. I will keep you safe. I will give you a life of freedom, not a life in a cage." Back in the grand townhouse, the Duke of Blackwood stood by the window of his study, staring out at the foggy street. He felt a grim, hollow satisfaction. He had done what was necessary. He had protected his honor. He had excised the rot from his house. He held the forged letter, the paper now limp and creased in his grip. He would burn it. He would erase this entire sordid affair. He did not go to her rooms. The thought of seeing her, of facing her tears or her defiance again, was intolerable. He would leave her to her solitary confinement. The next morning, it was Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper, who found the empty room. She saw the simple traveling dress gone, the valise missing, and she saw the ring, sitting like a solitary star on the dark wood of the dressing table. She knew, with the certainty of a woman who had seen all the hidden currents of a great house for 30 years, what it meant. She went not to the Duke, but to Lady Beatrice, who was taking her morning chocolate. "Her Grace is gone," the housekeeper said, her face impassive. Beatrice's cup rattled in its saucer. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "Her bed was not slept in. A traveling dress is missing. And this, my lady." Mrs. Gable opened her hand. The Blackwood ring glittered coldly in her palm. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Beatrice's face. It was more than she could have hoped for. The guilty party, fleeing in the night. It confirmed everything. It made Alistair's decision absolute. "I see," Beatrice said, her voice smooth as cream. "A confession in itself. Do not disturb His Grace with this news just yet. Let him have his breakfast in peace. The poor boy has suffered enough." Mrs. Gable bowed, her expression unreadable. She knew Lady Beatrice's ambition. She had seen the way the woman looked at Alara, a loathing barely veiled by polite concern. She had seen the handsome young poet, a man known in gossip circles to be desperate for funds, arrive for dinner. She had seen too much. Every servant in the house knew the Duchess was not flighty, not deceitful. They knew her quiet kindness, the way she asked after their families, the small gifts she gave their children at Christmas. They knew her loneliness. They knew she had been driven out. But the Duke, in his cold, proud isolation, knew nothing. He was the master of the house and the last to understand its heart. He knew his wife was gone. It would be 5 long years before he learned what and who she had taken with her. The years that followed hollowed Alistair out. Blackwood Manor, the sprawling country estate where he had sent Alara in his mind, became his own prison. He returned there after that fateful night, expecting to find her waiting, defiant and miserable. The news that she had fled instead struck him with a strange mix of fury and an unsettling, unnameable emotion that felt dangerously like loss. Beatrice spun the narrative with masterful skill. Alara's flight was proof of her guilt. She had run to her lover, abandoning her duties, her husband, her name. Society fed the carefully crafted story, whispered and then moved on. The disgraced Duchess of Blackwood was forgotten, a brief, unfortunate chapter in the Duke's life. His life grew silent. The halls of Blackwood, which had never been filled with warmth, now echoed with an oppressive emptiness. Beatrice installed herself as the de facto mistress of the estate, her presence a constant, cloying perfume in the air. She filled the house with her own people, distant relations and sycophants, their laughter brittle and their conversation vapid. She tried to arrange a new match for him, a vacant-eyed girl with a notable pedigree, but Alistair found he had no appetite for it. The memory of Alara's fierce, intelligent eyes, even filled with contempt, made all others seem dull. He threw himself into the management of his estates, finding a bleak solace in ledgers and crop reports. He became known as a hard but fair landlord, a remote and unapproachable figure who rode his lands alone, his face set in a perpetual frown. The wedding ring Alara had left behind, he kept. It sat in a locked box in his desk, a cold, heavy reminder of his failure. He told himself it was a reminder of her betrayal, but in the dead of night, when regret was a physical ache in his chest, he knew it was a monument to his own blind pride. The first crack in his certainty came 4 years after she had gone. He was in a tenant farmer's cottage, discussing repairs to a roof, when the farmer's wife offered him a cup of tea. A small boy, no more than 3, hid behind her skirts, clutching a crudely carved wooden bird. "Forgive him, Your Grace," the woman said, smiling. "He's shy. The former Duchess gave him that toy. She was ever so good with the children." Alistair froze. "The Duchess?" "Oh, yes, Your Grace. Before you were married so long. She'd visit the village school. She had a way with them. A gentle soul, she was." A gentle soul. A woman good with children. It was a small detail, but it lodged in his mind like a splinter. It did not align with the portrait of a selfish, deceitful adulteress Beatrice had so carefully painted. He had never seen Alara with children. He had never created an opportunity for her to be near them. He had kept her isolated in London, a decorative object. That night, he dismissed his valet and sought out Mrs. Gable, who now ran the household at Blackwood, a silent, efficient ghost from his London life. He found her in the cavernous linen room, overseeing the mending of sheets. "Mrs. Gable," he began, his voice sounding rusty in the quiet room. "Tell me about the Duchess, my wife." The housekeeper's hands stilled. She looked up at him, her gaze direct and unclouded by the deference he usually commanded. "What would you like to know, Your Grace?" "What was she like, when I was not there?" Mrs. Gable chose her words carefully. "Her Grace was quiet. She read a great deal. She was always kind to the staff. She missed the country. Did she seem unhappy?" A long pause. "She seemed lonely, Your Grace." "Lonely. Not conniving, not deceitful. Lonely." The word resonated with the emptiness of his own existence. "The night she left," he pressed, his heart starting to beat a heavy, painful rhythm. "The letter. The poet, Mr. Thorne. Did you ever see them together? Alone?" "Never, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable said, her voice firm. "I saw Mr. Thorne at the dinner party. I saw Lady Beatrice speaking with him at length in the conservatory before the other guests arrived. I never saw him speak a private word to Her Grace." The world tilted slightly on its axis. Beatrice and Thorne. Why would his aunt be speaking privately with a man who was supposedly seducing her nephew's wife? "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," he said abruptly, and left the room. The splinter of doubt had become a festering wound. The next day, he rode to London and hired a man named Dawes, a former Bow Street runner with a reputation for absolute discretion and relentless tenacity. "I want you to find out everything you can about a poet named Julian Thorne," Alistair instructed him in a drab, anonymous office. "Specifically, his whereabouts and his financial state 5 years ago. And I want you to find my wife." He gave Dawes a miniature portrait of Alara, a painting from the early days of their marriage where her smile was still genuine, if hesitant. The investigator's work was slow and methodical. He discovered that Thorne, a man perpetually chased by creditors, had come into a large sum of money a week after Alara's disappearance. The funds had been paid in cash, untraceably. Thorne had then left England for the continent, and had not been heard from since. It took Dawes nearly a year to trace Alara. She had been clever, moving from town to town, changing her name, paying for everything in cash. But a woman of her bearing, even in plain clothes, stood out. A thread of memory here, a description there, led him on a winding path until it ended in a small, wind-battered fishing village on the coast of Cornwall named Saltwick. "She goes by the name of Mrs. Croft," Dawes reported to Alistair in that same drab office. "She lives in a small cottage near the cliffs. She works as a seamstress, mending nets for the fishermen." Alistair felt a jolt, a strange mix of horror and admiration. A duchess, mending nets. She had not run to a lover. She had run to a life of hard, honest labor. "There is one other thing, Your Grace," Dawes said, his face unreadable. "She is not alone. There is a child, a boy, about 4 years old." The air left Alistair's lungs. A child, 4 years old. The timeline was a brutal, perfect calculation. The child would have been conceived just before she left. His child. "He has dark hair," Dawes continued softly. "And they say he has the most unusual gray eyes, like a storm coming in." Alistair's own eyes. He did not wait. He rode for Saltwick himself, leaving a stunned investigator in his wake. The journey was a torment of revelation. Every cold word he had spoken to her, every dismissive gesture, every moment he had chosen his pride over her, returned to him with the force of a physical assault. He had not just driven away his wife, he had driven away his son. He had cast his own heir into poverty and obscurity based on a lie told by his own blood. The rage he felt toward Beatrice was a white-hot fire, but it was eclipsed by the tidal wave of self-loathing that threatened to drown him. Saltwick smelled of salt and fish and damp earth. It was a world away from the manicured lawns of Blackwood. He left his horse at the single, shabby inn, the Salty Dog, and walked toward the cliffs, his fine leather boots coated in mud. He saw her before she saw him. She was in the small, chaotic market square, her head covered by a simple shawl against the sharp sea wind. She was thinner, the elegant softness of her features pared down to the essential, beautiful bone structure beneath. Her hands, as she examined a string of mackerel, were not the smooth, pale hands of a duchess. They were capable, slightly reddened by work and weather. She was arguing with the fisherman, a good-natured haggle that ended in a shared laugh. The sound of her laughter, so rare in his memory, was a knife in his gut. She was alive here, more alive than he had ever seen her. Then he saw the boy. He was playing near a stack of lobster pots, a small, sturdy figure in patched trousers. He looked up as his mother called his name, "Leo," and the world stopped. It was like looking at his own childhood portrait. The same dark, unruly hair, the same serious set of his mouth, and the eyes, the Blackwood eyes, gray and clear and startling in their intensity. His son. He started walking toward them, his feet moving as if in a dream. Alara turned, her transaction complete, and her eyes met his across the 20 yards of muddy ground. Her laughter died. The light in her face vanished, extinguished as if by a sudden squall. Her expression became a mask of pure, cold shock, which was quickly replaced by a shuttered, hostile neutrality. She put a protective hand on her son's shoulder, pulling him closer. He stopped a few feet from her. He could not breathe. He could not think. All the speeches he had rehearsed, the explanations, the apologies, evaporated in the face of her icy silence. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was different, lower, rougher, with the faint musical lilt of the local accent creeping into its edges. He swallowed, his throat dry. "Alara." Her name on his lips sounded like a sacrilege. "I am known as Mrs. Croft here," she said, her tone flat and dismissive. She looked him up and down, taking in his expensive, immaculate coat, his polished boots, his sheer, out-of-place ducal presence. "You are a long way from home, Your Grace." The title was a wall of ice between them. It was the same weapon she had used the night she left, and it had lost none of its potency. I know everything," he stammered, feeling like a fool. "The letter, Beatrice, it was a lie, a setup. I was a fool." She gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "You were, but that changes nothing." "It changes everything," he insisted, taking a step forward. She took a matching step back, keeping the distance between them, her hand never leaving her son's shoulder. Leo, the small boy who was the living, breathing embodiment of Alistair's catastrophic failure, looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. His son was a stranger his mother was protecting from him. "Does it?" Alara challenged, her voice dangerously quiet. "Does it change the fact that you believed it? That you looked at me, your wife, and saw a whore? That you condemned me without a trial, without a moment's hesitation? Does your newfound knowledge erase the 5 years I've spent scrubbing floors and mending nets to feed our son? Our son." She said the words, and the reality of them crashed over him anew. "No," he said, his voice cracking. "Nothing can erase that. But I came to ask for your forgiveness. I came to bring you home." "Home?" She looked at him as if he were mad. "This is my home, this cottage, this village, this hard, real life. This is the home I built when you threw me out of yours. You think you can ride in here like a conquering hero and simply reclaim what you discarded? You are more arrogant than I remembered." A woman walked by, nodding a greeting to Alara. "Morning, Ella. Is the little one's cough better?" "Much better, thank you, Mary," Alara replied, her voice momentarily warm before icing over again as she turned back to Alistair. The casual intimacy of the exchange, the use of a nickname, Ella, showcased how deeply she was woven into the fabric of this place. She had a life here, a community. She had friends. She had more than he had ever given her. "His name is Leo," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the boy. "I know his name," she retorted. "I named him. I held him. I walked the floors with him when he had a fever. I taught him his letters. You have no right to even say his name." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and he deserved every single one. He saw now the monumental arrogance of his quest. He had thought that uncovering the truth was the end of it, that he could present it to her like a gift, and she would fall into his arms, grateful. He had not understood that the crime was not the lie he had believed, but the fact that he had been capable of believing it at all. The flaw was in him, not in the deception. "Alara, please," he said, his voice raw with a desperation he had never felt before. "Let me try to make this right." "There is no making this right," she said, her voice final. She pulled Leo gently with her. "We are going home now. Goodbye, Your Grace." She turned her back on him and walked away, her small son trotting to keep up, his hand held tightly in hers. Alistair stood alone in the middle of the market square, the smell of fish and sea salt filling his lungs. He was the Duke of Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in England, and he had never felt so utterly powerless. He watched them go, the Duchess in her worn shawl and the heir to his dukedom in his patched trousers, until they disappeared around a corner. He had found them, but he was beginning to understand that finding them was not even the beginning of the battle. The war was to prove he was a man worthy of knowing them, and he had no idea if that was a war he could win. Alistair did not leave Saltwick. He took a room at the Salty Dog, a place whose raw simplicity was a constant, jarring contrast to the opulent prisons he called home. The innkeeper, a grizzled man named Finch with hands like knotted oak, regarded him with open suspicion. The entire village did. He was an alien creature, a lord in their midst, and his presence was an unwelcome disruption to the steady rhythm of their lives. He saw Alara from a distance. He saw her carry water from the village well. He saw her delivering mended sails to the docks, her movements efficient and strong. He saw her walking with Leo along the cliff paths, pointing out gulls and wildflowers. He was a ghost haunting the edges of her life, a life she had built not just without him, but in spite of him. He knew grand gestures would be rejected. He could not buy her forgiveness. He could not command her respect. He had to earn it, and he had no idea how. So he began with the only thing he could think of: small, silent acts of service. One evening, seeing the dwindling pile of wood outside her cottage, he spent 2 hours at the inn's woodpile, methodically splitting logs. His hands, soft and unaccustomed to labor, blistered and then bled. He ignored the pain. In the dead of night, he carried the wood to her cottage, and stacked it neatly by her door, then retreated before the village stirred. The next day, he saw the wood being used, smoke curling from her chimney. She said nothing. She gave no sign she knew it was him. But the wood was used. It was a start. He sent a message to Dawes in London. I want irrefutable proof, bank ledgers, witness testimony. I want to utterly destroy her. He did not need to specify who her was. Dawes understood. While he waited, Alistair learned the currency of Saltwick. It was not money or title. It was usefulness. He watched the fishermen haul their boats up the shingle beach after a storm and, without a word, joined them. He put his shoulder to the wood, his boots sinking into the wet gravel, and pushed alongside them. They shot him curious, wary glances but did not turn him away. A duke with his coat off and his shoulders straining was a novelty, but an extra pair of hands was an extra pair of hands. At the end of it, his muscles screaming and his clothes soaked with spray, one of the older fishermen clapped him on the back. "Good work for a man with soft hands, sir," he said, and it was the first kind word he had received. Alara saw it all. She saw the stack of firewood. She heard the whispers in the village about the strange lord who helped haul the boats. She saw him sitting alone in a corner of the inn, nursing a single ale, his face etched with a fatigue that seemed more than physical. It confused her. This was not the arrogant, untouchable duke she had married. This was a man performing penance. Her heart, which she had encased in 5 years of protective ice, felt a dangerous, unwelcome thaw. She hated him for it. It was easier when he was just a monster, a memory she could despise. This new, humbled Alistair was a far more complicated problem. Leo was the bridge and the chasm. He began to ask questions. "Who is the sad man, Mama?" he asked one evening, as they watched from their window as Alistair walked slowly back to the inn. "He is just a man, my love," Alara said, her voice tight. "He looks at you," Leo observed with the blunt honesty of a child. "He looks sad." A week later, Dawes arrived in Saltwick. He brought with him a thick portfolio of documents. He had been brutally efficient. He had found the clerk who had processed the payment for Beatrice, and the man, under threat of prosecution, had confessed everything. He had a signed affidavit from Julian Thorne, who, it turned out, was living in poverty in Paris, and was more than willing to betray his former patroness for a modest annuity. He had Beatrice's own bank records, showing the withdrawal of a large sum of cash the day before Thorne was paid. The web was complete. Its architect caught fast. Alistair took the documents, but he did not go to Alara's cottage immediately. He waited until evening. He knocked on her door, a simple act that felt momentous. She opened it, her face guarded. Leo peeked out from behind her legs. "May I have a moment of your time?" he asked formally. She hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing him into her home for the first time. The cottage was tiny, just 2 rooms, but it was immaculate and filled with a warmth his own grand houses had always lacked. Mended nets were piled in one corner, smelling of the sea. A child's drawings were tacked to the wall. It was a home. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of the small room and placed the portfolio on the table. "This is the proof," he said. "Everything you need to know about what my aunt did, what I allowed her to do." She did not touch the papers. She just looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you deserve the truth, all of it, and because I want you to know that she will never harm you, or anyone again. I am returning to London tomorrow to deal with her. I will see her ruined. I will see her exiled. I will have her name struck from every guest list and her presence erased from our family. This I swear to you." The ferocity in his voice was something new. It was not the cold anger of a slighted patriarch. It was the righteous fury of a man avenging a monstrous injustice. "And then what?" she asked quietly. "You will return here and expect me to pack my bags?" "No," he said, and the certainty in his voice surprised them both. I will return here and I will continue to chop your wood. I will help haul the boats. I will live at the inn and I will wait. I will wait until Leo no longer calls me the sad man. I will wait for you to believe that the man who left London is not the man who stands before you now. I will wait for the rest of my life, if that is what it takes." He turned and left, leaving the portfolio on her table. That night, Alara read every page. She saw the cold, hard facts of the conspiracy laid bare. The calculated cruelty of it made her feel sick. But it was Alistair's promise that echoed in her mind. "I will wait." He was true to his word. He went to London. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived for her from Mrs. Gable. It described, in spare but vivid detail, the scene Alistair had orchestrated. He had convened a family council. He had laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece. He had not raised his voice. He had simply presented the facts. Lady Beatrice had blustered, then denied, then collapsed. She had been stripped of her position, her allowances, her status. She was to live out her days on a remote, dreary estate in the north, a pariah. Alistair had not just defeated her, he had dismantled her. He had cleared Alara's name not with whispers, but with a cannon blast of truth. He returned to Saltwick as he had promised. He did not come to her cottage. He went back to his room at the inn, back to his life on the periphery. The villagers' suspicion had turned to a grudging respect. He was no longer the strange lord. He was the man who had pulled young Timmy Finch from the harbor when he fell from the jetty, who had paid for a new roof on the church without seeking thanks, who worked with his hands and kept his own counsel. The wall around Alara's heart had been breached, but it had not yet fallen. The final assault came not from a man, but from the sea. A vicious storm blew in from the Atlantic, a tempest that rattled the windows and sent waves crashing over the sea wall. In the middle of the second night of the storm, Leo woke up crying, his body burning with fever. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Alara's blood ran cold. The village doctor was in the next town, trapped by a washed-out road. She was alone, and her son was desperately ill. She bathed his face. She tried to get him to drink, but he was getting worse. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. There was a frantic, pounding knock on her door. She threw it open to find Alistair standing there, soaked to the skin, his hair plastered to his head, his face a mask of grim concern. Mr. Finch, the innkeeper, stood behind him, holding a lantern. "Finch told me the boy was sick," Alistair said, shouting to be heard over the wind. "I have some experience with lung fevers, from the army. Let me help." She did not have time for pride. She stepped aside and let him in. He moved with a calm authority that astounded her. He stripped off his soaked coat and knelt by Leo's small bed. His hands, now calloused and capable, were surprisingly gentle as he felt the boy's forehead and listened to his chest. "We need to get the fever down," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos of the storm. "Keep bathing his head. I'll prepare a steam." For the rest of the night, they worked together, a silent, seamless team. He showed her how to create a tent over Leo with a sheet and a kettle of hot water, filling the air with steam to ease his breathing. He held the boy's hand, speaking to him in low, soothing tones when he cried out. He supported Alara when she felt herself start to sway with exhaustion, his hand firm on her arm. In him, she saw none of the remote Duke of Blackwood. She saw a soldier, practical and calm in a crisis. She saw a father, his face taut with a terror that mirrored her own. In the small, storm-tossed cottage, surrounded by the roar of the wind and the sea, they were not a duke and a runaway duchess. They were just a man and a woman fighting for their child. Toward dawn, the fever broke. Leo's breathing eased, and he fell into a deep, natural sleep. The storm outside began to recede, its fury spent. Alara sank into a chair, bone-weary and limp with relief. Alistair remained by the bed, watching his son sleep, his shoulders slumped. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet room. The words felt inadequate, flimsy. He looked over at her, his face haggard in the pale morning light. "There is no need for thanks. He is my son." He said it so simply, a fact, an acceptance, a claim he had finally earned the right to make. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the sleeping breaths of their son and the distant sigh of the retreating sea. "I was wrong, Alara," he said at last, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just about Beatrice. I was wrong about everything. I married you as a duty, and I expected you to be an ornament. I never tried to know you. I never saw you. And for that pride, that blindness, I am so sorry. I have been sorry every day for 5 years." She looked at the man before her. The arrogant Duke was gone, stripped away by regret and humility. In his place was a man who had faced his own failings and had spent months in quiet, arduous penance. He had not tried to command her. He had served her. He had not demanded his son. He had saved him. Tears she had not shed in 5 years began to trace paths down her cheeks. He saw them, and his own eyes glistened. He rose and walked to the small table. From his waistcoat pocket, he took a small object and placed it on the wood. Her wedding ring. It glittered in the dawn light, the same way it had on her dressing table all those years ago. "I have carried this with me every day," he said softly. "It is not a command. It is not an expectation. It is a question. If you will have me, not as a duke, but as a husband, as Leo's father. We will live here, if that is your wish. We will live anywhere, as long as we are together." She stood up and walked to the table. She looked at the ring, then at him. She saw the hope and the fear warring in his eyes. She saw a man who had walked through fire and come out changed. Slowly, she picked up the ring. It felt different in her hand now. Not a manacle, but a promise, a new promise. She held it out to him. "Put it on," she said. His breath hitched. With a hand that trembled slightly, he took the ring and slid it back onto her finger. It felt like coming home. They did not stay in Saltwick, but they did not abandon it. Alistair purchased the cottage for Alara, a place she could always return to. He set up a fund for the village, ensuring the fishermen had the best equipment and their families would never want. When they returned to Blackwood Manor, it was on entirely new terms. The great house, once so cold and silent, was filled with the sound of a child's laughter. Alara was no longer a decorative duchess, but a true partner. She took charge of the ducal charities, using the pragmatism and empathy she had learned in Saltwick to create real change. She was respected, not for her title, but for her wisdom and her strength. Alistair was a changed man. The remote, cold Duke was gone forever, replaced by a husband who listened and a father who adored his son. He had learned the hard way that power and position were hollow without love and trust. One crisp autumn evening, a year after their return, Alara stood by the long gallery window, watching Alistair on the lawn below. He was teaching Leo how to fly a kite, his deep laughter carrying on the wind. The kite, a brilliant splash of red against the blue sky, soared and dipped, a symbol of their new, untethered joy. He looked up and saw her watching, and his smile widened. It was a smile that reached his gray eyes, filling them with a warmth she had once thought impossible. In that shared glance, a world of understanding passed between them. The gilded cage was broken. The ghosts were laid to rest. What remained was real and hard-won and infinitely precious. She rested a hand on the cool window pane, her wedding ring a comfortable weight on her finger, and felt a profound, quiet peace settle over her. They were home,